right, welcome, all three of you. Thanks very much for doing this, by the way. So if you're anything like me, I've spent like the last 2 years in my kitchen, staring at my laptop, saying hi to my teams on a screen. This is like being let out of prison. But I know that when I return home, I'm going to be doing my time in the kitchen again. So my first question to you is remote working here to stay? Is this a permanent state of affairs, or will there be a return to normality? Jeff, why don't you take the...
Well, I would say that pre-pandemic, there were people who work remotely, and now there's just a lot more who are working remotely. And I think 10 years from now, 5 years from now, there'll be even more. So it won't be everybody working remotely all the time, but I think increasingly a larger and larger share of the global workforce is going to be working without going to an office on a routine basis. That's my guess.
Okay. And Alex, you have a company where everyone is remote.
Yeah, we're fully remote, about 400 people in 55 different countries. I think remote work is here to stay for sure, right? Because you've got amazing talent all around the world, and limiting yourself to a small radius to hire doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay.
I'm on the other side. I actually think, while I don't believe there will be a return to normal, and I do believe the new normal will be different, I think actually hybrid is the future. I think there's so much that you get by being in an office with people, if it's just once or twice a week, and I don't think that's going to go away. I agree that there are going to be companies that are going to be fully remote, and there's going to be more of them than there were before, because there's so much technology enabling it. But there are people who miss the human connection, and I think the majority of companies will be somewhere, some version of hybrid.
Okay, and how does it affect productivity? Because I got to say, before the pandemic came in, at Insider, our assumption was that when we all started working at home, it would actually slow things down. And for many cases, in many instances, some things sped up and we got more productive. So that was a surprise. What is your experience? Because you are all, in some ways, invested in remote working.
Yeah.
Is it really more productive or not?
I mean, for us, for sure. We acquired a company recently, and we have an office now in one of the countries we're in. And every time I go there, I can't actually get a lot of work done because you want that human connection. So when I'm at home, I actually do the best work, and I think it's the case for most of our teams, for sure.
I think there's two types of productivity. There's personal productivity that I think to some extent has increased, right? You don't have to go to office, and you get a lot more work. And then there's inter-team productivity, and I think that has gone down. I think there's a lot more miscommunication. Someone's not replying to you. You can't go and tap on their shoulder. So when you have to work, you have a project and you work by yourself, you have to code something or write a paper, higher productivity. When you have to work as a team, I think it's actually a lot lower. And I do think coming together increases that. So I've noticed we bring people to the office, and for a week or two after, I see the productivity increase significantly because those barriers are down and people are more likely to connect to each other, say, hey, you kind of sucked on this project. Can you help me? Can you make it better? And as soon as time passes and they don't see each other in person, those barriers come up and people have a harder time communicating. They're less likely to send a Slack to someone. So that has gone down, I think, significantly.
And my thought is probably a little bit of a blend. We saw productivity go way up during the pandemic. We served more customers. We created more things. I was shocked. By the way, I've been a CEO for 25 years. I was totally against remote work. That was like, you cannot be productive if you don't come into the office. Well, I, like everybody else,
But your company sells remote products.
I know, but you know what? I was an old-fashioned thinker, so I was really expecting the worst, but we saw a lot of productivity. I think it really depends on the kind of work. I do think inter-team work is a little bit harder, where you've got more functional silos. You got to really work on, well, we've decided that we've got to really identify cross-functional dependencies and make sure that not only do you know whose inputs you are supplying to, but also what they need. And also trying to facilitate the communication with processes across teams, we think is really important. So there's definitely some things that are a lot harder. Also, we've found that structured agendas, where you know what the objective is and you know how you want to process through it, that's typically a lot more productive.
Yeah.
Open agendas just don't happen as often. I mean, it's just kind of unusual to schedule a meeting to talk about nothing. But a lot of times when you're in those open spaces, you make connections that you otherwise wouldn't make. And I think that there's some kind of breakthrough innovation that might be harder in a remote work environment.
Okay.
I totally agree with you.
We certainly saw at Insider some things get faster, but there were things that we lost. We have onboarded hundreds of new people who've never been to the office.
Yeah.
And problems that would normally get solved by, how do I do this? Who do I talk to about this? In an office, you just ask the person next to you, and you have the answer in 30 seconds, and your problem is solved. Suddenly, that feels dead. Particularly if you're a new employee, it's very difficult to know where to go, and so we worried a bit about that.
Yeah, but you've got to set up the right processes, right? For us, everything is fully laid out. We've built our workflows to work for remote work, right? To have people being onboarded that way. So if you think about the problems from that angle, I think maybe for you it was a bit harder, switching from being fully in office to fully remote. But on our side, we just built everything from ground up to support that growth and those people.
Yeah.
And the hardest thing we found is when everybody was in the office, pretty straightforward. When everybody worked from home, surprisingly more straightforward than we thought. Getting into a hybrid situation is way harder. So we started having some meetings where some people are in a room and some people are on Zoom. And it is very difficult, especially if you're wearing a mask, goodbye, forget it.
Yeah, that is
so
tough.
we really are subscribing, as many people I think are now, that even when you're in a conference room, if anybody is not in the conference room, everybody has to have a laptop with a camera on, and it has to be effectively a Zoom meeting, but some people happen to be in the room, because it really creates a disparate experience when you have some people on Zoom and some people in the room.
When they began lifting restrictions, did you see among your staff resistance either to returning to the office or resistance to staying at home, either way?
I think definitely coming back to the office has been very hard. A lot of people don't like doing it. I think there's a mix of people being worried about COVID, but I actually think the majority of people have changed. A year and a half is a long time when you build new habits, and those habits stay with you. So you are used to waking up at 8 and doing your first meeting in pajamas, and it's totally fine. And now you have to commute 1 hour to an office, and you have to put
First meeting in
real
pajamas?
clothes on.
That never happens.
So definitely it's been really hard. So I actually feel that to bring people together, you have to have very different incentives if you don't make it required. And I don't think you can make it required anymore, by the way. I think companies that will do that will lose a lot of employees. So we hired a person, and their main job is to create experiences and help teams bring people together in fun ways. So doing offsites for the engineering team or the marketing team, and let's all go and have lunch outside, or go to the park, or do a scavenger hunt. So we feel that breaking the barriers between people so they can give each other feedback is extremely important. But just saying come to the office won't solve the issue. So we're thinking of very creative ways to incentivize people to come and get past that habit of spending the whole day in their pajamas and coming and meeting people. And then seeing the value in that and continuing to do it.
Okay. Alex, your company is fully remote, and how many employees do you have?
400 people. Yeah.
400 people, no offices.
Almost, yeah.
Okay, how do you do the culture thing? How do you make them feel they're all part of a team and they're on the same page?
Yeah, I mean, we build a lot of events, fun events. We have all hands every week or product meetings. I think a lot of the culture we've built is from the people we hired. They've got the same mentality, the same mindsets, and they appreciate that culture. Again, for us, it's always about the ability to bring the best talent, right? And I think something that worked really well for us is we have WeWork memberships. So we don't have any office, but they actually meet in the WeWork offices at some point when they want to have a bit of time together. And that has been the best for us, for sure.
Okay. I was just going to say, I think that a hard thing about someone new coming on board is so much of getting a job done is knowing who you depend on to get your job done and knowing what information you need.
So true.
And if you're a new employee and you don't have really intentional practices in a remote kind of a situation, you're just not going to have any context. You won't know who you need to talk to. You won't know where to find the information. So I do think that any company that's thinking about setting up more of a remote work way of operating needs to really get good at not just hiring, because there's a global talent pool now. And Amada, I totally agree. If you force your employees to come back to work, many of them will because they have to, but your best employees likely will not.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll come and work for a place like Coursera where we will get the best data scientists and the best computer engineers in the world because you don't have to live next to our offices. But when you onboard them, helping them figure out who you need to know and develop a relationship with and what information you need to do your job and where you can find that information can no longer just be left to serendipity and bouncing into each other at
How
the
do you
office.
do that? Like, do you
We created all these playbooks. We have these things called how we playbooks, how we hire, how we onboard, how we have one-on-one meetings, how we decide, how we have meetings, just so that there's a common way of getting things done.
And this is why people teams are the rock stars of the last 2 years, right?
Totally.
Building everything here.
Yeah, hire a great head of people.
So on the subject of hiring, I'd like you guys to talk about salaries and local markets and competition. Typically at Insider, we would hire people in London, or we would hire people in New York. And now we have staff who are saying, no, I like it in the Florida Keys. Like, maybe I don't want to come in. And it alters the price of labor, the scale of wages, and what you might consider competing offers and stuff like that. Could you talk about that?
Mata, you want to start?
Go.
Sure, I can start. I think it's an interesting challenge, right? We've hired people all over the world. We have 12 offices in a lot of different countries. So this was always something we thought about, especially when people transfer. There's a lot of things to keep in consideration. Doing business in certain states, having employees requires certain taxes. So it's not like as simple that one day you can wake up and have people all over the world. So you have to, even though you are starting to hire remotely, you have to be fairly thoughtful about it as you grow. I would say when it comes to salaries, I actually think people are still going to go with local markets, but I think because of the remote nature of the world, the actual salaries in all markets are going to go up. So you might still hire someone on a London salary, but the London salaries are going to be higher because there's going to be a lot more demand for some of these places, right? So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that evolves. But I don't think there's going to be, regardless of where you work in the world, you're going to make the same salary. I think we have a ways to go to get to that spot.
Totally, and that's the way we decided to, is we said, look, we're going to compete in local labor markets. Turns out almost every single labor market in the world is cheaper than Palo Alto, so that's generally favorable. But we have a lot of engineers who are moving to Boise, Denver, all over the country, and we have a slight decrease in pay depending on standard of living. But guess what? If that's where the talent goes, those wages are all going to come up.
Exactly.
And frankly, I think that Palo Alto wages will come down a bit as you have greater competition for labor.
That's my next question, because San Francisco, the Valley, Palo Alto, notoriously the most expensive place to be. Are you starting to see anything there get cheaper?
No.
Not yet. Not yet.
I went to a restaurant the other day,
though.
and then I went a week later, and everything was $5 more expensive. And I was like, how did that happen? So no.
And we try not to hire in San Francisco, actually.
You avoid San Francisco?
Yeah, if we can, yeah. It just creates such gaps, in the HR organization that we don't love it.
Interesting.
But something similar has been happening for a while. We opened up our engineering office, a second engineering office in Toronto about 4 years ago. And at the time, it was about a 40% discount for computer software engineers, same level to the Bay Area. But now there's a lot of tech companies moving into Toronto because there's a great talent pool there. And the wages are starting to come up, and that's basic economics. And so I think, for me, and that's what you said, Mata, I think every company who decides not to tap into a global labor force is going to be paying a premium to compete in those competitive labor markets and not getting the benefit of talent that's in lower cost areas. And so I think it'll be hard to be competitive if you don't have a remote work strategy.
Well, and also the mindset of people not in the Bay Area is a bit different. I have a lot of friends in the Bay Area. They tend to be a bit more mercenary-like, switching from the Twitter to the Google to the Facebook. So, people given opportunities in different countries are usually a little more loyal, let's say, to the company.
I don't agree with that. I think actually our main office is in the Bay Area, and we've hired people all over the world. I think we have a similar retention around the world. It's pretty high everywhere. So I think it just depends on your culture. I think it just, I don't, maybe because I've been in Bay Area for a long time, I don't agree with you on that one. I'm just gonna.
You're just used
on
to
the
it.
record.
Okay, we've got a minute or so left. What does remote leadership look like? I run a large team, and certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, I struggled a bit with this. It's weird, just sitting in front of a screen, talking to people and not being able to feel whether it's landing and whether you're communicating properly and that kind of thing. Talk a little bit about leadership when you're far away.
I would make a distinction between leadership and management. It's a little bit counter, maybe intuitive. I think remote management needs to be way more focused on building a personal relationship because it's harder to do. You're not there. And most teams, by the way, when you're in the office, they don't talk to everybody in the office. They talk to the 15 people around them and their manager. So that unit of management, I think, has to really double down on communication and empathy and personal connection. On the other side, leaders in an office, depending on how big it is, are way more able in a remote world to be present, to be accessible, to be involved. I do new hire orientation for everyone now because I do it on Zoom. So I think leaders could be more present and management has to be closer emotionally.
I so agree with you. I also do, I think all the founders, we do meetings now with part of, so you get to hear from all of us on different topics, which wasn't the case before. But with management, I only have 4 direct reports that are all leaders, and I have made it, I went out of my way to meet with all of them. I go on biking rides with 2 of them. I went to LA to see the other one. I feel if I don't get that in-person connection and I don't build it, it's very hard to trust them and trust them to lead their teams. So I think it's it's a personal connection is far more important.
And on that note, we're finally out of time. But thank you all for doing this. We really appreciate it. And it's great to see you in person.
Yay!
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.